So today we're very happy to have Remy Rhodes from Aix-Marseille University, who will speak on Siegel's axioms and conformal bootstrap in label theory.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. So yes, today I'm going to discuss Siegel's axioms for CFTs and discuss how you can apply them to a specific CFT, which is the Liouville theory. So, well, first, it's a joint work with Colin Guillermou, Antti Kupiainen, and Vincent Vargas. And my talk will be a bit informal. My aim today is to explain the main ideas of Siegel axioms and how they apply in the Liouville theory. So before we start, let me give you a toy example that you are probably familiar with, which hopefully will help you to understand why these questions are in some way natural. So if you take a Markov process indexed by the real line, then well, the question is how can you describe its law at different time? So what you do is that you cut the real line with your times, and then on each time interval you apply the propagator, so the semi-group, and you have this relation here that you all know by heart. That if you want to describe the law of this process, you just have this composition rule with the semi-group. Okay, so the question is now. What if now your process is indexed by Riemann surfaces instead of the real line? And so this is more or less the question Siegel tries to answer. And why would you care about such processes? Well, typically, this situation arises in the study of Euclidean quantum field theories. So this is my main motivation, say. So now, let me make a quick overview of the CFTs approach and the Siegel approach for CFTs. So this is a formal discussion. So, so Euclidean quantum field theories, so they are used to model a statistical physics model. And when you have a quantum field theory, you are interested in computing some observables called fields, and the expectation values of those fields are called the correlation functions. So basically, these observables are random fields, and you want to compute, say, the cumulant of such fields. Well, it turns out that at critical temperature, well, depends on you of your model, but in some cases there is a special critical temperature at which your system features some further symmetries which are called conformal, and those they are called conformal field theories, so CFT in my talk. And it turns out that in the 80s, BPZ realized that this extra symmetries constrains the system very strongly, and they use this idea to classify CFTs. And well, this is the bootstrap approach developed by BPZ, and they use their approach to give explicit expression for the correlation functions of many CFTs. Well, mostly the minimal models, and the simplest one is probably the critical Ising model in this context. But there are other minimal models. And well, this is about, well, BPZ applied their idea mostly in 2G, but there has been recently very impressive results about, well, about using the bootstrap to compute critical exponent in the higher dimension for the Ising model, say, by Ryzhkov and collaborators. So this is just more or less the context. And let me now describe some situation. This is not systematic, but the functional integral approach that I will describe now may happen for some CFTs. It may be the case that you've got a functional integral for your system, like for the Liouville CFT I'm going to discuss, or the Ising model, say. So more or less the picture is the following. You have a system, and you can consider the set of all possible configuration of your system with a uniform measure on it, whatever that means mathematically for the time being. We'll see later how you can deal with that. And you are given a partition function. So you have sorry, there is a typo here. So this sigma here is your uniform measure on configuration. And you weight this uniform measure by some potential exponential of minus inverse temperature is beta, and the H is your Hamiltonian. Okay. So how do you spot phase transition? Well, you tune beta so that some observables of your system feature a failure of analyticity at some special specific value of beta. And turns out that you expect that for this critical value, your system will feature this extra conformal symmetries. So now imagine you are, yes? Questions? So now the correlation functions are expectation values for this functional integral. Well, so for some well-chosen observable that I will discuss a bit later. For instance, in the critical Ising model, this F could be the value of the spin at the location, at some given location, or the values of the energy density. Okay, so this is this object that you want to compute. And so the formalisms for CFT is the following. So imagine that you can define your system on any given Riemann surface sigma. This Riemann surface comes equipped with a metric G. And for each such a pair, so sigma and G, you can define your functional integral or any way of that gives you an expectation value indexed by this Riemann surface. Okay. On this Riemann surface, you are also supposed to be given a collection of random fields. So V alpha stands for these random fields. They are indexed by Z. Z is on the surface, and there is a label alpha. It's just a way to distinguish all the possible fields that you've got here. Okay. So for instance, in the critical Ising model, alpha is equal to 1 or 2, and 1 it's the spin, and 2 it's the energy density. Okay, and so now on this surface, you want to compute the correlation function of your fields. So you take the expectation values of a subset of these fields here. You form the product, and you take the expectation value. It gives you a correlation function. So this correlation function depends on the weights alpha, the ZI, the location of the at which you want to compute those correlation functions. It depends on the Riemann surface and the metric on the surface. Well, the axioms for CFT is that the way well, first, this correlation function do not depend on the way you've parameterized your surface. So it just means that if you take a diffeomorphism of sigma, then if you move the location of points by your diffeo, it's just the correlation function on the same surface, but equipped with the pullback metric. So this is just well, this first condition is just well, what you expect from any physics theory. It's just invariant under reparametrization. And then you have something more specific, which is called the Weil invariance. So if you take a smooth function phi on your surface and you multiply your metric G by the exponential of phi, so this is a conformal change of metric, then the dependence on phi is completely explicit. And this correlation function in the conformal metric here relates to the initial one up to some factors. So here you have a product of exponential. Here you have your function phi evaluated at Zi times a weight. Here this is a number, a complex number, which is called the conformal weight of the field. Okay, and here you have a global functional, which is just which is called the Liouville functional of the field phi in the metric G. So here this is the exterior derivative of the function phi. Here you have the Ricci curvature of your surface, and here this is the volume form Vg on your surface in the metric G. Okay, so the dependence on the metric here is completely explicit up to, if you apply it, if you change your metrics by GFO or Veil or the Veil action, then the dependence of your correlation function is completely explicit with respect to this change of metrics. So here the number that you've got in front of the Liouville action is called the central charge, and this is the number which classifies the CFT. Okay, so now this is the geometrical axioms for CFT. Let me discuss just a little bit what Segal tells us. So it's another approach of CFTs, and the idea is you are given decorated surfaces. So what is it? This is a Riemann surface with marked points. So this is my marked points here. And possible boundaries. So these boundaries are analytic. This means that they are more or less holomorphically parameterized by the unit circle. And on each boundary, you have what you call them in and out, depending on the orientation. What does it mean? This means that on your Riemann surface, you have an orientation. Okay? So, and this orientation gives you, along the boundary, an orientation inherited from the orientation of the surface. So, if the parametrization of your circle coincide on the boundary with the parametrization inherited from the surface, you say that the boundary is out. Otherwise, if it does not coincide, you say that it is in, like incoming. Okay. So why do you do so? This is because later you want to glue these surfaces together, and if you want that the glued surface preserved the orientation in a natural way, you cannot glue boundaries in any way. You have to take care of the orientation along the boundary. Okay, so these are what I call a decorated surface, and as I said, in the Segal approach, you want to glue such pieces of surfaces together. So how do you do so? So you take two surfaces, sigma 1 and sigma 2, and you choose on each of them, you choose a incoming boundary and the outcoming boundary, and you conformally weld them together along the boundary. So apparently there is a degree of freedom here, because you can twist a little bit one circle and still glue them together. But actually, when I said there is a parametrization along boundaries, this parametrization comes with a special point. This is in a way, this is the starting point of your parametrization. Like, I mean, as every boundary is parameterized by a unit circle, so say by theta between 0 and 2 pi. So it gives you a special point on each boundary circle for the value of the parameter theta, which is equal to 0. So in a way, you can imagine here that you have a marked point along each boundary. And when you glue two circles together, these special marked points have to be identified by the gluing. So this removes this degree of freedom with respect to the twist here. And this allows to parameterize the twist when you glue these pieces together. Any questions so far? It's okay. Okay, so now what are the Segal axioms? Well, in the Segal approach, you are given a Hilbert space, which is associated to the CFT. You are given an Hilbert space, and for let's say that when you have a decorated surface together with marked points on the surface, which are called Z. So Z, it's a vector of several points, because in ball type, I mean vectors. And to each of these points, so say that you have n marked points here on your surface. To each of these points, you attach a weight, alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha n. So when you have a decorated surface together with marked points, this is called an admissible surface. So in the Segal approach, to each admissible surface, you associate, there is a map that associates an operator which takes values in the tensor product of your Hilbert space n times. So n times, n is the number of outgoing boundaries, and k is the number of incoming boundaries. So when you have your surface with k ingoing and n outgoing, you associate an operator going from this tensor product here to this one here. Okay. So this map has to satisfy a list of axioms. So some of them are expected from CFTs, and I will discuss a little bit more the other. So first of all, you want that this map is invariant under change of under diffeomorphism. So I don't make this precise, but this is something that you expect from scratch. There is also a veil invariance. So this means by change of conformal metrics, and this is of the same flavor as I mentioned just before. Of course, another axiom is that you don't want that your series depends on the way you have labeled your boundaries. So this is another quite natural axiom. First important one is that if sigma has no boundary, so you just have mark points, then you want that this operator, which has no entries and no outputs, it just coincides with the correlation function of your CFT. Other important action is that if you take two disjoint surfaces, like we have here, if you have two disjoint surfaces, you just see the wall as a function of this input here and two outputs here. Okay, so this means that the operator on the union is just the tensor product of your two operators for each surface. And the gluing. So what is this gluing? This gluing axiom is that if you look at the operator associated to the gluing of two surfaces, then this is the partial trace of the tensor product of these operators. So let me be a bit more precise in the next slide, because I want to discuss this axiom here. So in practice, what this gluing means? In practice, your Hilbert space will be an L2 space with respect to some measure, mu, on some space M. And so that the tensor product k times of the Hilbert space it can be identified with the L2 space on the Cartesian product of M equipped with the product measure. Okay, so amplitudes, they can be seen as maps from L2 to L2 of these powers. Recall that the power denote the number of incoming and outgoing boundaries. As you have maps from L2 to L2 by the theorem of Schwarz kernels, these operators have integral kernels. This means that if you apply your operator to a function phi in this space here, in this red space, then it can be represented as an integral over some kernel K. Ball type is for the operator, and without ball type, it's just for the kernel. So this is the integral over the kernel of your function over the L2 space, over the space. Okay. So these operators have integral kernels, and now just a simple check that I want to mention is that if you take two operators from edge to edge, so these are endomorphism of edge, both of them with integral kernels, say K1 and K2. If you compose them, then you can check. It's a simple check that it is a kernel. It has the composition as an integral kernel, and the integral kernel. So there is a typo here. The integration is over U here. The integral kernel is this one here, and you have integrated over the variable U here. So this is an instance, the most simple instance of a partial trace. You just make the tensor product of these two kernels, and you identify both variables here, and you integrate over the space here. So this gives you the kernel. And Segal's rule is just the generalization of this rule. So if you look at the partial trace, what is it? It just corresponds to the integral kernel when you compose your two operators, where you see when you see composition only with respect to glued variables, and you can see other variables fixed. Okay, so the definition that you've got is this one. Then the operator associated to the glued surface is just the partial trace in the boundaries that you've glued together. Is that more or less clear?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So good. So now, how to use Segal? The main idea is the following. Take a Riemann surface with a marked point, and you want to compute the correlation function on this surface without boundary. And you want to cut this Riemann surface into elementary pieces. So elementary pieces will be disks, pans, and annuli. So if you look at this Riemann surface here, you will draw a circle around your point here, your marked point here, and then you will cut the remaining part around your circle into annuli and pans. And more or less, this cutting should give you the picture here. So here you have the circle around the point here. Here you have the pant, which is this part here, two annuli here and here. Again, two pans on both sides, and an annuli to glue the two ends of both pans. Okay. So I don't want to enter into details, but this decomposition is kind of natural when you want to decompose the Riemann surfaces into elementary pieces. And this is well, you can see this cutting as a parametrization of your Riemann surfaces, and the parameters are the length and the twist of the annuli that you've got here, 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 and here. I just wrote for this one, but each annuli carries some length and twist. Twist is the fact that you turn a little bit your annuli, and you can cut, you can decompose into such elementary pieces any Riemann surface with marked points. Okay. So the point is now to compute these elementary pieces. How do you do so? Well, this is the important point is that when you have a CFT, it's expected that there is a spectral resolution of your Hilbert space. A spectral resolution, it means like some kind of Plancherel formula. Okay, so it means that you can expand the scalar product in your Hilbert space along some basis of your Hilbert space. So I write here a sum and an integral because the labels here may be continuous and discrete. Okay, so there is a P for the continuous part and the K for the discrete part. Okay, so there must be a spectral resolution attached to this Hilbert space. And furthermore, it turns out that this basis should be in principle expressed in terms of the disk amplitudes. So the disk amplitudes are these operators of Segal. So let me, well, these operators given by Segal attached to a disk with one mark point at the center of the disk. So you expect that there is a spectral resolution for your CFT attached to this Hilbert space, and the elements here are expected to be related to the disk amplitudes given by Segal. So this is not exactly true because actually, so this eigenbasis is indexed by P and K, and actually there is a little bit of algebra hidden behind that. K here is a discrete set, and for some special value of K, say K equals 0, it does correspond to the disk amplitude. But for K different from 0, it's no more a disk amplitude, but there are some algebraic relation in your CFT that should allow you to describe all these elements in terms of the case K equal to 0. Okay, I don't say more for the time being, but well, let's say that the spectrum should correspond in a way to the disk amplitudes and some algebraic way to recover the remaining part of the spectrum starting from the disk. Okay, so anyway, you have this spectral resolution, and now how do you? What can you say about the point amplitudes? So take a point and glue 3 disks to the point. Then you get a sphere with 3 mark points. Okay. So if you glue disk to the point, you should have the correlation function on the Riemann sphere with 3 mark points. If you glue descendant, so when K equal to 0, these are disks, I said. But when K is different from 0, these fields are called descendants. And so if you want to glue a descendant here instead of disk, there are some algebraic relation that tells you that the resulting surface is related to this sphere. Okay, so for the time being, it's just a bit vague, but I just want to give you the idea, and I'll give more details in the case of the Liouville theory. Another part which is important is the annuli. So if you look at the annuli, it's just an endomorphism of the Hilbert space, because if you look here, you should necessarily have incoming boundary and the outgoing boundary. So the annuli is just an endomorphism of the Hilbert space. And it turns out that you expect that this spectral resolution here, if it's well chosen, it's just formed by eigenvalues. Well, the annuli, the eigenbasis is just a family of eigenfunction of this annuli amplitude. Okay, so basically, you should be able to compute all these quantities. So now, what do you do? When you have a Riemann surface with marked points, you cut the surface into points, annuli, and disks. You use a Segal axiom to express the gluing of the different elementary bricks like points, annuli, and disks in terms of traces of operators. Then the important part is that you can express a trace in terms of your spectral resolution. Okay, this is just well, more or less a general statement. Is that you can expand the trace here as a sum over the spectral resolution, so that in the end you have a collection of points, annuli, and disks that are glued together, and you have a way to compute them. Okay, there is a bit of algebra, and the final outcome is the following: is that your correlation function on a given Riemann surface with marked points should be given as an integral over some the squared modulus of some holomorphic function of the moduli parameters. So here I collect all the lengths of annuli, twists of annuli, and the position of the marked points. And rho of P is collect all the integration over P that you've got by expanding all the traces in your correlation function. And as I said, here you should this measure rho here. It should collect all the it should collect all the structure constants that you've got by gluing disk to the pants. So I forgot to mention that here, it's important that when you expand all traces of your glued Riemann surface, each pant will end up with a disk or descendant of a disk glued to its ends. And this way, it will contribute to what is called the structure constants. So this is the correlation function of the sphere with 3 marked points. So all the sphere with 3 marked points are collected in the measure here. And then you have the contribution here of all the moduli parameters. So this is the rough idea of Segal's approach. And the outcome is that for a CFT, correlation function should be expressed in terms of some special holomorphic function of the moduli parameter, which are called conformal blocks, up to some measure here, which collects all the structure constants. It's important that here there are 2 parts here. The part here which collect the structure constants depend on the CMT. It is model dependent, because structure constants depend on the CFT you are looking at. And here these blocks are universal in the sense that they are all the same for any CFT that has the same central charge. For all the CFT that have the same central charge. Well, this is a general picture that you should have for the correlation function of a CFT. So so this is a nice way to explain a CFT to anybody, but well, there is the catch. The catch is that in practice, this is hard to check that a CFT satisfies Segal's axiom, and there are not so much examples where these axioms have been checked. Essentially for the most simple CFTs. What I'm going, well, this talk is how do you see the Liouville CFT? So I will discuss a bit what is this Liouville CFT in the next slides. But I want to explain how you can check that Segal's axioms are satisfied for the Liouville CFT. So just a quick reminder about the Liouville CFT. So what is it? So you have a Riemann surface sigma, a two-dimensional Riemann surface equipped with a metric G. And formally, this Liouville CFT is a functional measure on the space of all maps on your manifold sigma that you weight. So here again, formally, d sigma stands for the uniform measure over all such maps. So this is just formal, of course. And you weight this uniform measure by the exponential of the Liouville action. So the Liouville action is this functional here. So it's a functional of the map phi. It also depends on the metric that you've got on your Riemann surface. Here you have the exterior derivative. Here again, this is the Ricci curvature of the manifold. And this is exponential of your map phi. Okay. There are several parameters here. So this mu here can be any mu can be any positive real number. It does not matter so much. This parameter, the only thing that is important is that it's positive, because there is a scaling with respect to this mu that you can apply, and it gives you that for different mu's, it produces the same theory. So mu is not that much relevant. What is important is that the gamma here that you got here, it's between 0 and 2. And the Q here is related to gamma by the formula here. So recall here that this is the volume form on your manifold. So this is your Liouville functional. And sorry. Well, this theory was introduced by Polyakov in the 80s to model 2D quantum gravity. So most of you are familiar with this now. I won't discuss that much. As I said, sometimes it's also related to higher dimensional physics via the AGT conjecture. Actually, this is a link between 4D Yang-Mills and the correlation function in Liouville theory. It's relevant for this talk because actually the AGT conjecture is really with respect to the the bootstrap approach, because in some Yang-Mills, what you get in the end is this expression here, and this is only because of the bootstrap that you can identify Yang-Mills with the Liouville theory here. Sorry. And as you know, it's also the conjectural scaling limit of large random planar maps, so triangulated, randomly triangulated surfaces. I don't discuss that much today because you are mainly familiar with that connection. So, well, this slide is about what we can do and what we are doing right now for the Liouville CFT. Well, what we've done, well, the Liouville CFT, I will explain a little bit in my forthcoming slide, but there is a construction, a probabilistic construction for this CFT. Also, you can compute the structure constant. So the structure constant is the sphere with 3 marked points. You can compute the structure constant of this CFT, which this is called the DOS formula. In a recent paper, we've computed the spectrum of the LCFT. So the spectrum is just the spectral resolution that I've mentioned in the Segal approach. So we are able to compute the spectrum of the LCFT. Now, this is the work I'm going to talk about today. We are able to show that LCFT satisfies Segal's axioms, and the ongoing part of our work is to prove that you end up with the bootstrap formula for the Liouville CFT. Actually, we have a proof for all the correlation function on the Riemann sphere and on the tori, and we are still writing the part concerning all Riemann surfaces. Because in the end here, you will see that these conformal blocks are defined in terms of series, and it's not clear at all why these series converge. So we have well, it's not even known in math rigorously. So we have an argument for spheres, tori, and we are finishing our work by checking that these conformal blocks also converge on all possible Riemann surfaces. So, but I will give you an example on the tori later. So recall, so now just a little bit of, let me recall the construction of the probabilistic construction of LCFT. So as I said, you want to give sense to this formal measure on the space of maps. And there are several, two important parts if you want to construct this object. Here you have a gradient squared. So more or less, it should be related to a Gaussian measure. And this measure is called the Gaussian free field. This is a linear perturbation here of the Gaussian measure. So it shouldn't be too difficult to handle. And here you have the exponential of the map phi. So under the Gaussian measure, you have to make sense of this exponential. And you can do so by using Gaussian multiplicative chaos theory. It's not straightforward to take the exponential because under the Gaussian measure, this map is not smooth. So you have to apply a regularization procedure. So this has been done recently, you can give sense to this path integral, and the mathematical definition that you've got is the following. So here you have a normalization constant, which depends on the metric. This is the regularized determinant of Laplacian in the metric G. Here, this is the volume of the manifold. So this is just a constant. Here, so and well, here you have a f is a test function. So you want to define your measure, and you can define your measure by specifying its value on each arbitrary test function f. So here is just your input. Here, xg is the GFF in the metric G on your Riemann surface. So what is this GFF? So it has it's a Gaussian. You can think of it as a Gaussian field indexed by the points of your manifold, and with covariance given by the green kernel of the Laplacian. And you fix the constant by imposing the boundary condition that your field is of vanishing average in the volume form Vg over your manifold. So the integral over Vg of this field x here is 0. So and here, so this is the GFF. Here you have the integral over the manifold of the curvature times your Gaussian free field. C is a real parameter that you integrate over the real line. And here you have the Gaussian multiplicative chaos with respect to the GFF. So as I said, you take the exponential of the GFF. Epsilon stands for a regularization of this field, which is rather badly behaved. You regularize it, and then you send epsilon to 0, and you get a non-trivial object in the limit. This object is non-trivial provided that gamma is not too big. So this means between 0 and 2. So this is a bit quick, but I don't want to be more specific on the construction here. What if you want to define the correlation functions? You will integrate with respect to the measure I've defined here. You will choose your f here, like the exponential of your phi. Okay, and the label alpha here is the weight that you put here. You can think of it as the Laplace cumulant of your measure. Okay, so correlation functions are just the product of these guys here that you have evaluated at various points of your manifold. So n is arbitrary, location of points too, they just have to be different, and you attach weight to this location. This gives you a collection of correlation functions. And the main statement for the existence of this correlation function is that they are well defined if and only if they satisfy some bounds, which are called Seidel bounds. So the bounds are that the alpha I shouldn't be too large. They have to be smaller than Q. Recall that Q is related to gamma by 2 over gamma plus gamma over 2. So they shouldn't be too large. This is a condition of integrability close to the Z, to the corresponding Z. And this is some probabilistic version of the Gauss-Bonnet theorem. The sum of your weight should be bigger than Q times the Euler characteristic of the manifold. So in particular, you see that if your manifold is the Riemann sphere, the Euler characteristic is 2, the sum here has to be bigger than 2Q. And so, well, if each alpha I is less than Q, then the sum here, the n in this sum should be bigger than 3. Okay, so correlation function on the Riemann sphere exists for n bigger than 3. Okay, and also this correlation function satisfies the geometrical axiom of CFT, meaning diffeomorphism and file invariance. So in the case of the Riemann sphere, every metric is conformal up to diffeomorphism. It's conformal to some fixed metric. You can choose, you can pick your favorite metrics on the Riemann metric on the Riemann sphere here. And here I take the round metric, whatever it is. This is the metric you get when you project by the Riemann sphere by stereographic projection on the complex plane. The automorphism of this round metric are the Möbius transform. And if you just use the geometrical axiom, meaning GIF and value invariance, you see that they entail the following relation. If you apply a Möbius transform to the 3-point correlation function here, you have an explicit dependence with respect to the the Möbius transform here, which is this product here. Okay, so so in a way, if you want to compute the 3-point correlation function on the Riemann sphere, you can just compute them here at your favorite triplet of points Z1, Z2, and Z3, say 0, 1, and infinity. And this quantity is called the structure constant on the Riemann sphere. Actually, we showed a few years ago that you can compute exactly in terms of special function what this quantity is. And this formula is called the DOZZ formula. I won't give you the explicit formula for these guys here, but what you have to keep in mind is that it's completely explicit. Okay, so in the case of the Riemann sphere, the 3-point correlation function are known in the Liouville CFT. So now, how do you construct the Hilbert space? I want to give you a short description because I want to keep it intuitive as much as I can. Well, actually, what is important here is that the description of the Hilbert space and the Hamiltonian that would give you the spectral resolution does not depend on the surface you're looking at. But the more symmetry your surface has, the more simple it is to identify this Hamiltonian. But it's the same for all Riemann surface. So I stick to the case of the Riemann sphere because it has a lot of symmetries. So recall that your path integral is a measure on the space of maps defined on the Riemann sphere. And if you, so for me, the Riemann sphere is the complex plane because of stereographic projection. So in a way here you have a random map that is parameterized, and this random map is parameterized by a complex plane. And if you change to polar coordinates, you can see this random map as a function of t and theta. And actually, if you see this process as indexed by t, taking values in the space of fields on the unit circle, then it's a Markov process. Okay, and you can define the Hilbert space as the L2 space of its invariant measure. And the Hamiltonian is nothing but the generator of this semigroup. It can be seen as the generator of dilation acting on your series. So this is a shortcut to define the Hilbert space and the Markov process, but I think it's more or less intuitive this way. You can also see what is the action of your rotation on your series, and you can see that rotation generates a unitary semigroup that I call exponential of this. The generator of this unitary group is called pi in my talk. So just using symmetries on the Riemann sphere, so you can define the generator of dilation and rotation, h and pi. And the Hilbert space of the Liouville CFT is just correspond to the invariant measure of this semigroup. Okay, so now the main thing we proved a few months ago is that for gamma between 0 and 2, this Hamiltonian H, the spectrum, well, this operator is self-adjoint. Its spectrum is absolutely continuous, and it can be completely diagonalized. So it's a family of eigenstates. So a family of eigenstates for this Hamiltonian. So they are indexed by P and the Young diagrams, nu and nu tilde. So Young diagrams are just decreasing sequences of integers with all but finitely many null terms. Okay, so you can index this the spectrum, the eigenstates of this Hamiltonian by P. Well, P on the half line. I forgot the plus here. So just this is just for positive real. So and the Young diagrams. So this eigenstates diagonalize H and the generator of rotation. And furthermore, there is a spectral resolution attached to this family. Here, you have this unusual factors here. They just come from the fact that this family is not orthogonal. So you have well, you can think of this coefficient as Gram coefficients. Okay, so you have a spectral resolution attached to this Hilbert space. What is important here is that this eigenstate have an analytic continuation in the parameter Q plus IP. So I call it with an alpha this analytic continuation. And when alpha is real, they correspond to the disk amplitudes in the Liouville theory. I will give you later what are the disk amplitude in the Liouville theory, but you have to keep in mind that when alpha is real, they correspond to disk amplitude in some way. But in the spectrum, you are not real. When you are in the spectrum, you are at the value Q plus IP. So what is important is that you have an analytic continuation between the states that you can compute, that are disk amplitudes, and the state in the spectrum. When the Young diagrams are not empty, for general Young diagrams, these fields are called descendants, and you can compute them starting from the disk amplitudes. Okay, so there is some algebra behind, but that I don't want to discuss. It's related to the Virasoro algebra, but I don't have time to discuss the exact link between descendants and primaries. So primaries for me is when Young diagrams are empty. Okay, so now what are the amplitudes in the Liouville theory? When you have a Riemann surface, I will give you the idea just so you have a decorated surface with your in and out boundaries. What you do to compute your amplitudes in the Liouville CFT is that you will condition your path integral with respect to the boundary values of your field. So here I just give you the formal definition, but in practice, you have these quantities here are functional of the GFF. You know pretty well how to condition the GFF on boundary values. And the thing is that you can make sense mathematically of these quantities here. Well, they define this way the kernel of trace class operator acting on the tensor product of your Hilbert space as you wish. Well, and if you define this way all the amplitudes in the Liouville theory, you can check that it satisfies Segal's axioms. So now, if you want to compute the basic amplitudes in the Liouville theory, you first have to compute the amplitudes for annuli, and it turns out that as announced, the annuli are can be expressed in the, it's not as announced, but the annuli can be expressed in terms of the generator of the semigroup of dilation and the semigroup of rotation associated to rotations. So as announced, disk amplitude should be eigenvalues of this operator. Well, I mean, all the elements of my spectral resolution are eigenvalues of the disk amplitudes, okay? So you can compute explicitly and express the disk amplitudes in terms of this semigroup of dilation and rotation. And for disk compounds, how do we proceed? So we have to compute the point amplitude applied to the psi taken at all possible values of alpha and possibly with non-empty Young diagrams. So how do we proceed? First, we consider the case when the alphas are real and the case where you have empty Young diagrams. Why? Because in this case, we know that they correspond to disk amplitudes. So we can glue the disks together, and this gives us the sphere with 3 marked points. And we know that this sphere with 3 marked points is the dose formula. Then, so for alpha real, this is a case closed. When alpha is not real, we use the analytic continuation that we know on this state. And so applying the point to this psi should give us the analytic continuation of the OZZ formula, which is analytic, so no problem with that. And when we have non-empty Young diagrams, we use some identities that are specific to CFTs, which are called word identities, and it allows us to show that for descendants, the point. So this is it has three input or outputs, whatever they are. The point applied to three of these guys again reduces to the DOZZ formula up to some explicit factor, which has well, algebraic content. But this term is completely explicit. So in the case of the Liouville theory, we have this picture, and we can compute of the elementary pieces of disks and points when you apply these amplitudes to the elements of the spectral resolution. So I know that I'm a bit late, but I'm almost done. So the conclusion is that how do you proceed to get this formula in the Liouville theory? I repeat what I said for Seagal, but you cut your surface into elementary pieces. Express the gluing of these elementary pieces in terms of partial traces. You expand the traces along the spectral resolution that you've got. Compute the contribution of each elementary amplitude, and then you should end up with the formula here. So this is a bit quick maybe, but let me show you on an example how it works. So let's take the case of the torus. So the torus is not the general torus can be parameterized by this way. Say you have a vector 1. So this is they're parameterized by the vector that you've got here. So the vector has real part theta and the imaginary part t. So this is the torus with this part here identified with this line here, and this segment here is identified with this one here. And you have a marked point on it. Okay, so how can you cut this torus with elementary pieces? So you draw a circle around the marked point here. Then you cut your torus here and here, say. So you have a point around the disk, the point here, and then you have an annuli between the two other ends of your point. So if you cut this torus here, you should get this picture here. So the torus one-point function, so the partition function of the Liouville CFT on this torus here, let's call it V alpha of x. There is only 1 point. Well, actually, as the theory is invariant under translation, actually this quantity does not depend on x. So if you use what I said, so you first glue the pieces together to get this formula. This is the formula that you just get by saying that these pieces are all glued together. So here, this is the trace of the point. Point has here has 2 inputs and 1 output. So in one of the input here, you've glued a disk. So the disk amplitude, this is this disk corresponds to the disk that you've got here. The weight is alpha. So in one of the input, you plug the psi alpha. Okay. On the other input, you should have the contribution of the annuli, which I plugged here. Here you've got the annuli, and this factor here is comes from the annuli amplitudes too. So in the 2 inputs here, you have the disks, the annuli, and then you take. So this is an endomorphism of the Hilbert space, and you can take the trace. This is the formula that you've got just by gluing. So now you expand the trace along your spectral resolution, and you end up with this formula here. This terms here come from the spectral resolution. And now you just have to make some simple computation. Here you know that these guys here of the spectral resolution are eigenstates of this rotation and dilation. And this is what you use. You just apply the rotation and dilation to the eigenstate. It gives you the contribution here times the initial state. And so you can remove this guy here up to adding this factor in the integral. And then you just have to use the pant computed at psi alpha, and your eigenstates here is just correspond to those up to explicit factor. Okay, so this is well, now with these two relations here, this is easy to end up with the following formula for the 1-point torus correlation function. The correlation function is given by the integral over the spectrum over P of the dose coefficient times the holomorphic elliptic conformal block squared, where the conformal block is formed by collecting in the sum here all the Young diagrams with the same length. This is the same of the length is just the sum over all integers in the Young diagrams. You just collect the sum of all the coefficients you get. So this coefficient here and this coefficient here, the Chapeau-Lavoie form. This gives you the coefficient beta n in the conformal block, and here we have the series in the modular parameter. And this gives you the formula for the 1-point correlation function on the torus. You can do the same strategy for higher order correlation functions, but it's not, maybe it's not that much pedagogical. I think the 1 point is enough on the slide. Well, I'm done. Thank you for your attention.
All right, thanks Remy for the talk. I guess I'll stop the recording now and